Imagine this: 5 American Sherman tanks, outgunned, out-armored, and written off as death traps, suddenly find themselves face to face with dozens of German Panthers. The math was brutal. The Panthers had thicker armor, bigger guns, and German crews were trained to be ruthless. By all logic, the Shermans should have been burning wrecks within minutes. But instead, the unthinkable happened. When the smoke cleared, the Panthers lay destroyed, and the Shermans rolled forward almost untouched. How did the inferior tank pull off one of the most shocking victories of World War II? The answer lies in the Battle of Arracourt, a fight that changed the future of armored warfare forever. Welcome back to W2 Untold, your home for the most thrilling untold stories of history. Today, we dive into one of the most unbelievable tank battles ever fought, where American Shermans didn't just survive against German Panthers, they dominated them. Stick around till the end, because the truth of this battle might just flip everything you thought you knew about WWII tanks. Setting the stage, September 1944. The Second World War is at a turning point. The Allies have already stormed the beaches of Normandy, pushed across France, and liberated Paris. Too many soldiers on the front lines. It feels like victory is just around the corner. American and British troops are racing toward Germany's border, convinced that the war might be over before Christmas. But in war, overconfidence can be deadly. While the Allies are stretching their supply lines thin, Germany is quietly preparing a desperate move. The Nazi leadership knows they are losing ground on both fronts. The Soviets are hammering them in the east, and the Americans are closing in from the west. To reverse their fortunes, German commanders decide to launch a sudden, brutal counterattack in the Lorraine region of France. Lorraine is no ordinary patch of land. Its open fields and rolling hills make it perfect for tank battles, and its roads lead directly toward key supply routes the Allies desperately need. If the Germans can strike hard enough here, they might cut off General Patton's Third Army, delay the Allied advance, and buy themselves precious time to recover. The plan is bold. Send in fresh panzer brigades, armed with the fearsome Panther tank, Germany's most powerful armored weapon. On paper, the Panthers should dominate the battlefield. Their guns can destroy an American Sherman from 2 kilometers away, while their thick frontal armor is nearly impossible to penetrate. To the Germans, this is the chance to remind the Allies that the Reich's armored fist is still deadly. But there's a catch. The counterattack relies on surprise, fog, and the myth of Panther's superiority. The Germans believe that by concentrating their armor, they can smash through American lines before the Shermans even know what hit them. What they don't realize is that the Americans are not just relying on tanks. They have something much more dangerous, a new way of fighting that combines artillery, air power, logistics, and intelligence into a system the Germans are completely unprepared to face. What begins as a gamble for Germany soon turns into one of the most shocking armored defeats of the entire war, the Battle of Arracourt. On paper, this battle should never have been a contest. The German Panther tank was, by 1944, one of the most advanced armored vehicles on the planet. Designed after bitter lessons against Soviet T-34s, it combined lethal firepower with heavy protection. Its long-barreled 75mm KWK-42 cannon could punch through an American Sherman at nearly 2 kilometers, long before the Sherman's shorter gun could even get close. The Panther's 80mm frontal armor was a steel wall that American rounds often bounced off uselessly. It was bigger, stronger, and, at least in theory, deadlier than anything the Allies could field in large numbers. Across the battlefield, the Americans had their workhorse, the M for Sherman. Compared to the sleek German machine, the Sherman looked almost modest. Its armor was thinner, barely 50mm in the front. Its standard 75mm gun was designed for flexibility, not tank dueling. On open ground, a Sherman caught head-on by a Panther had little chance. Soldiers even joked grimly that a Sherman burned like a matchbox when hit. To many observers, the Sherman seemed hopelessly outclassed. But here's the twist. Numbers and theory don't always decide battles. The Sherman's so-called weaknesses hid surprising strengths. It was lighter and more mobile, able to maneuver faster than the lumbering Panther. Its turret rotated quickly, letting gunners switch targets in seconds, something a Panther's slower mechanics couldn't match in close combat. More importantly, the Sherman was reliable. It started when you needed it. It kept moving, and if it broke down, mechanics could fix it quickly. In contrast, the Panther's complicated engineering often betrayed it. Breakdowns, engine fires, and mechanical failures were common. Perhaps the greatest difference wasn't in steel, But in doctrine, the Germans treated tank battles like duels, relying on superior armor and guns. The Americans treated their Shermans as part of a larger team. A Sherman wasn't supposed to fight alone. It had artillery on call, air support circling above, and infantry working alongside it. In that sense, the Sherman wasn't just a tank. It was the centerpiece of a combined arms system that made every crew far deadlier than their machine's specifications suggested. So when the mighty Panthers rolled into Lorraine, confident of victory, they weren't just facing Shermans. They were facing an entire war machine built on speed, coordination, and adaptability. And that would make all the difference. Dawn broke over Lorraine like a slow gray blanket. For the Germans, the morning mist was a gift, the perfect cover for a sudden, violent strike. Panthers rumbled into position on the ridges round Arracourt, crews hushed and eager. From their vantage on Hill 265 they could watch the valleys below, waiting for American Shermans to trudge into what they believed would be a killing zone. On paper it was flawless, heavy tanks in ambush, visibility near zero, and the element of surprise. A recipe for a classic armored knockout. But fog is a double-edged sword. While it muffled movement and hid German formations, it also masked the battlefield in such a way that simple strength could not guarantee victory. The Panthers relied on long-range, precision shooting, see the target, measure the range, and pull the trigger. Close-in fighting and chaos were their weakness. In the mist, those long sightlines vanished. The hunters became confused by the same gray that had helped them approach. The German plan still had teeth. Crews practiced the textbook ambush, hold position, wait for the enemy to cross pre-measured coordinates, and open up with devastating, long-range fire. But the Americans didn't behave like a beaten foe walking blindly into a trap. They used the fog against the fog. Shermans moved in small, deceptive groups, used dead ground and hollows to mask their approach, and crucially, called on artillery that had been pre-registered on the very fields the Panthers expected to dominate. When the ambush triggered, it didn't unfold as the Germans imagined. Artillery fell first, precisely and suddenly, blasting the fields the Panthers had assumed safe. White phosphorus smoke and high explosive rounds erupted around German positions, throwing up choking clouds that ruined optics and tracks. Panthers that had expected clean, long-range shots found themselves blinded, disordered, and under a barrage they hadn't planned for. Seizing that instant, American crews surged from unexpected angles. Shermans, light and maneuverable, slipped through hollows and struck side armor at close range, exactly where the Panthers were vulnerable. The fog had been meant to guarantee a slaughter. Instead, it became the stage for confusion, improvised tactics, and a devastating counterpunch. Surprise had changed sides, and the Panthers learned, too late, that a hidden advantage can vanish the moment the battlefield becomes a system. Artillery, air, armor, and crews acting together, rather than a simple duel of guns. The American situation. The battle that morning lasted only a few hours, but its impact echoed far beyond the smoke-filled fields of Lorraine. When the guns finally fell silent, the landscape was littered with wreckage. 8 German Panthers lay burning, their hulking frames twisted, tracks torn apart, black smoke spiraling into the gray sky. These were supposed to be the invincible predators of the battlefield, long-range killers that could shred Shermans with ease. Yet here they were, reduced to smoldering carcasses. The real shock wasn't just the destruction of so many Panthers. It was the fact that the 5 American Shermans, hopelessly outnumbered at the start, had survived almost untouched. For the crews inside those tanks, the outcome felt almost surreal. They had braced themselves for slaughter, knowing full well what Panther guns could do. Instead, they had fought smart, coordinated every move, and turned the Germans' confidence into their downfall. News of the clash spread quickly through the ranks. For the Americans, it became a moment of pride, proof that training, teamwork, and adaptability could beat raw firepower. For the Germans, it was a bitter reminder that their technological edge was no longer enough. The Panthers' thick armor and big gun couldn't protect it from artillery that struck from above, or from Shermans that outmaneuvered it in the fog. And this was just the beginning. The fight near Arracourt marked the opening blows of a larger struggle that would rage for days. Time and again, German units hurled their prized Panthers into the fray, expecting to crush the Americans through sheer superiority. Time and again, they were met with the same result: crippling losses, shattered morale, and an enemy that refused to fight by their rules. What happened in those few hours wasn't just a battlefield skirmish. It was a turning point in mindset. It showed that the myth of German invincibility could be broken. It showed that a so-called weaker tank, when used as part of a bigger system, could stand toe-to-toe with the best the Reich could build. At Arracourt, the Panthers had come hunting, but by the end of the day, they were the ones reduced to prey. The morning of September 19, 1944, was thick with fog. Visibility was so low that crews could barely see beyond a few hundred meters. Out of that gray curtain, 12 German Panther tanks crept forward, engines growling, guns ready. Their orders were simple: smash through the American line near Arracourt. On paper, the outcome was already written: 12 Panthers against just 5 Shermans. Heavier guns, thicker armor, perfect conditions for an ambush. By every measure of logic, the Americans were doomed. But war has a way of defying logic. The Shermans weren't sitting ducks. They were waiting, hidden, prepared, and connected to a larger web of support. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, a commander who knew how to turn slim chances into victories, had drilled his crews to fight smart. Instead of standing toe-to-toe with the Panthers, the Shermans used the fog as cover, shifting positions quietly, using every fold of terrain as a shield. When the Panthers finally emerged, they expected a clear shot at helpless targets. Instead, they were met with sudden, precise fire. The Shermans struck from unexpected angles, hitting the weaker side armor that the Panthers thought was safe. The Panthers tried to respond, but their turrets moved too slowly, their lines of sight too limited in the mist. The advantage of range and armor, the very strengths the Germans relied upon, had evaporated. Then came the hammer blow: artillery fire. Pre-registered American guns opened up, saturating the fields with shells that fell like clockwork. Panthers, packed close together in the fog, found themselves in chaos. Tracks were blown off, formations shattered, and commanders struggled to regain control. What should have been a clean advance dissolved into confusion. When the fog lifted hours later, the result stunned even the victors. 8 German Panthers burned on the fields. The 5 Shermans were still alive. Not a single one had been destroyed. What looked like certain defeat had become an almost impossible triumph. At Arracourt, numbers and logic had said the Shermans stood no chance. But tactics, preparation, and sheer adaptability rewrote the story. The lesson was clear: sometimes the lighter, underestimated fighter wins, not because of what it is, but because of how it's used. The shocking outcome: the battle that morning lasted only a few hours, but its impact echoed far beyond the smoke-filled fields of Lorraine. When the guns finally fell silent, the landscape was littered with wreckage. 8 German Panthers lay burning, their hulking frames twisted, tracks torn apart, black smoke spiraling into the gray sky. These were supposed to be the invincible predators of the battlefield, long-range killers that could shred Shermans with ease. Yet here they were, reduced to smoldering carcasses. The real shock wasn't just the destruction of so many Panthers. It was the fact that the 5 American Shermans, hopelessly outnumbered at the start, had survived almost untouched. For the crews inside those tanks, the outcome felt almost surreal. They had braced themselves for slaughter, knowing full well what Panther guns could do. Instead, they had fought smart, coordinated every move, and turned the Germans' confidence into their downfall. News of the clash spread quickly through the ranks. For the Americans, it became a moment of pride, proof that training, teamwork, and adaptability could beat raw firepower. For the Germans, it was a bitter reminder that their technological edge was no longer enough. The Panthers' thick armor and big gun couldn't protect it from artillery that struck from above, or from Shermans that outmaneuvered it in the fog. And this was just the beginning. The fight near Arracourt marked the opening blows of a larger struggle that would rage for days. Time and again, German units hurled their prized Panthers into the fray, expecting to crush the Americans through sheer superiority. Time and again, they were met with the same result: crippling losses, shattered morale, and an enemy that refused to fight by their rules. What happened in those few hours wasn't just a battlefield skirmish. It was a turning point in mindset. It showed that the myth of German invincibility could be broken. It showed that a so-called weaker tank, when used as part of a bigger system, could stand toe-to-toe with the best the Reich could build. At Arracourt, the Panthers had come hunting, but by the end of the day, they were the ones reduced to prey. The secret to the Sherman success at Arracourt wasn't hidden in steel or armor thickness. It was in teamwork, the way American forces wove tanks, artillery, infantry, and aircraft into a single, unified machine of war. The Sherman itself might have been lighter and weaker, but it was never meant to fight alone. Every crew inside those tanks knew they were part of something larger, And that made all the difference when German Panthers pressed forward. It wasn't just the Shermans pulling the trigger. Artillery batteries, dug in behind the lines, were already locked on to key approaches. The moment a Panther formation revealed itself, Sherman crews could call down fire within minutes. Barrages of high explosive shells rained on advancing armor, breaking up tight German formations and forcing them to fight as scattered, vulnerable targets. This synergy gave the Americans a weapon no Panther could match: precision. Overwhelming firepower delivered at exactly the right moment. On the ground, infantry units added another layer of defense. Armed with bazookas and anti-tank guns, they created deadly zones where Panthers could not advance without risking ambush. Infantry also secured villages, crossroads, and hedgerows, terrain that turned German armor into easy marks for close-range strikes. Shermans weren't just driving forward blind. They moved in lockstep with soldiers who protected their flanks and spotted targets hidden in the mist. And above, the skies belonged to the Allies. When the fog lifted, P-47 Thunderbolt swooped down with rockets and machine guns, tearing into German columns from above. Even fragile liaison planes, those little Piper Cubs, circled the battlefield to direct artillery with pinpoint accuracy. The Germans had no answer to this airborne eye in the sky. Together, this web of cooperation transformed the Shermans from vulnerable lightweights into the centerpiece of a devastating war machine. The Panthers, powerful but isolated, fought as individuals. The Shermans fought as part of a team. Arracourt proved a simple truth: hardware wins duels, but teamwork wins wars. Why Sherman won #2.war isn't just about what a machine can do on paper. It's about what it can do day after day, under mud, rain, and fire. At Arracourt, this truth became painfully clear. The German Panther was a marvel of engineering: heavy armor, powerful gun, sleek design. But it came with a fatal flaw: unreliability. Panthers broke down so often that entire units lost fighting strength before they even reached the battlefield. Engines overheated, gearboxes failed, tracks snapped. In some cases, more Panthers were abandoned due to mechanical failure than were destroyed by enemy fire. By contrast, the American Sherman was not glamorous. No soldier would claim it was the best tank of the war in terms of raw specs, but it had something far more valuable in a long campaign: it worked. Day after day, Shermans rolled forward, started reliably, and kept fighting. If they broke down, and every machine eventually did, mechanics could fix them quickly with abundant spare parts. The design was simple, almost forgiving, and that made it perfectly suited for the grind of war. At Arracourt, this difference in reliability shaped the entire battle. While German commanders struggled to keep their Panthers operational, American units had Shermans ready whenever and wherever they were needed. A Sherman might not outgun a Panther, but a Sherman that's in the fight always beats a Panther sitting dead on the roadside, with its engine smoking. There was also a psychological edge. American crews trusted their machines. They knew their tanks would get them into battle and, more importantly, get them out again. German crews, by contrast, often rolled forward wondering if their engine would quit at the worst possible moment. That uncertainty gnawed at confidence, and in tank warfare, confidence is half the fight. Arracourt proved that reliability is not a luxury. It is a weapon. The Sherman's ability to fight consistently, every single day, gave the Americans an endurance the Germans simply could not match. And in a war where momentum mattered, that reliability was as decisive as any gun or armor plate. Why Sherman won? Number 3, tanks are machines, but machines are useless without the men inside them. At Arracourt, the quality of training separated the Americans from their German opponents more than steel or firepower ever could. Every American tank crew went through months of standardized training at Fort Knox. They weren't just gunners or drivers, they were soldiers, trained to perform every role in the tank. If a driver was hit, the gunner could take his place. If the loader went down, someone else instantly filled in. This flexibility meant American crews could keep fighting, even under chaos and casualties. They had drilled so consistently that teamwork became instinct. The Germans, however, were fighting a very different war in 1944. Years of grinding losses on both fronts had bled away their veteran crews. The Panthers rolling into Lorraine often carried green recruits, rushed through training programs shortened by desperate fuel and ammo shortages. Many had barely 100 hours in a tank, compared to Americans who often had 10 times that experience. Panthers may have been technically superior machines, but without seasoned crews, their potential was wasted. This difference showed on the battlefield. American crews reacted quickly to sudden threats. shifting positions, calling artillery, or coordinating with infantry without waiting for orders. German tankers, bound by rigid doctrine and lack of confidence, hesitated. And in tank warfare, hesitation was fatal. At Arracourt, battles weren't won by lone heroes or flawless machines. They were won by disciplined teams who could adapt under fire. American crews brought that edge to every engagement, and it gave them the ability to outthink and outfight their opponents, even when outnumbered. In the end, the Shermans weren't just tanks. They were part of a human system where every crew member knew his job, his comrade's job, and how to win as a team. The Germans never matched that, and it cost them dearly. Before a German Panther could even line up its sights, American artillery often had already spoken. At Arracourt, one of the U.S. Army's most devastating weapons wasn't a tank at all. It was artillery. The Americans had perfected a technique called time on target. Instead of firing shells as soon as guns were ready, calculations were made so that every shell from multiple batteries landed at the exact same second. For German tank crews, that meant there was no warning whistle, no chance to scatter, just an instant rain of explosions erupting all around them. In a single shattering moment, entire advances were ripped apart before Panthers ever reached the front line. This precision wasn't just about firepower, it was about coordination. Radios connected observers, gunners, and commanders in real time. A Sherman spotting movement could call for fire, and within minutes, dozens of guns miles away would unleash a storm of steel. The Germans, relying on slower communication and fewer guns, simply couldn't match this devastating tempo. The psychological effect was just as deadly. Tank crews, already nervous about mechanical breakdowns and fuel shortages, now faced the terror of invisible American artillery that could strike without warning. Some Panthers were destroyed outright, others crippled, and many arrived at the battlefield shaken, scattered, and far less effective. At Arracourt, artillery didn't just support the Shermans, it acted as a force multiplier. Combined with tanks, infantry, and aircraft, these taut barrages made sure the Germans were bleeding strength, long before the duels of steel ever began. When the morning fog finally lifted over Lorraine, the balance of power on the battlefield shifted instantly. Clear skies meant one thing: the P-47 Thunderbolts were coming. Nicknamed the Jug for its bulky frame, the P-47 was no beauty queen, but it was built like a flying tank. Armed with rockets, bombs, and 8.50 caliber machine guns, it became the bane of German armor. Once the fog burned off, swarms of Thunderbolts swept over the battlefield, hunting columns of Panthers and supply trucks trapped on the open roads. To a German crew, the sight, and even the distinctive roar, of a P-47 diving from the sky was sheer terror. Rockets slammed into tanks, bombs blasted convoys apart, and strafing runs shredded anything that moved. A Panther's thick armor could shrug off many Sherman shells, but from above, its weak top plating was a fatal vulnerability. One well-placed rocket could turn a superior Panther into a burning wreck. More than just killers, the Thunderbolts were force multipliers. They disrupted German movements, shattered morale, and denied the Wehrmacht the ability to regroup or reinforce. Even when they missed, the psychological effect was brutal. Tank crews abandoned vehicles, convoys scattered, and attacks stalled. At Arracourt, the combination of Shermans on the ground and Thunderbolts in the sky made survival for German armor nearly impossible. The Panthers weren't just fighting American tanks, they were being hunted from above, and once the skies cleared, the battlefield belonged to the Thunderbolts. War isn't just about machines, it's about the men inside them. At Arracourt, American tank crews carried with them something the Germans did not: faith in survival. For U.S. soldiers, the battlefield wasn't a one-way ticket. They knew that if they were hit, medics were close, ambulances were ready, and field hospitals were well-stocked. Blood plasma, morphine, trained surgeons, and rapid evacuation systems meant a wounded tanker often had a real chance of living. To fight another day, this knowledge changed everything. It gave men the courage to push forward, take risks, and hold their ground, knowing that being wounded wasn't automatically a death sentence. German crews, on the other hand, fought under a shadow of despair. Their medical system, strained by shortages and constant retreat, couldn't match the Americans. Many German soldiers knew that if they were burned or maimed inside a Panther, there was little hope of rescue, let alone treatment. Ambulances were scarce, medical supplies dwindled, and evacuation under American air dominance was almost impossible. That reality gnawed at morale. It made tankers hesitate, fight more cautiously, and sometimes even abandon their machines at the first sign of danger. So while the Sherman may have been lighter and less armored, the men inside it had a reason to fight harder. Confidence in rescue and care gave them an invisible armor, a psychological edge that statistics can't measure, but history remembers. At Arracourt, that difference in spirit was just as important as guns and armor. It wasn't just about surviving a battle, it was about believing you could. The Battle of Arracourt began under a cloak of fog, and at first, that fog was Germany's greatest ally, thick and blinding. It concealed the movement of Panther battalions as they crept toward American positions. The Shermans, with their lighter guns and thinner armor, couldn't see far ahead, and for a moment, the advantage seemed firmly in German hands. Surprise was on their side, but fog is fickle. As the hours passed and the September sun burned through, the very cover the Germans relied upon began to lift, and with the clearing skies, the battlefield shifted decisively in America's favor. Suddenly, the Shermans weren't fighting blind anymore. They could coordinate with artillery spotters, call in devastating time on target barrages, and maneuver with far greater confidence. Then came the game changer, air power. Once the skies opened, the P-47 Thunderbolt swooped in, turning the open fields into a killing ground. German tanks that had crept forward unseen in the morning were now easy prey by afternoon, struck from above while Shermans and infantry pressed them from the ground. In a way, the weather told the story of Arracourt. The fog that once promised German victory became their undoing once it lifted. What began as an ambush turned into a slaughter, as American coordination between ground, artillery, and air overwhelmed the supposedly superior Panthers. At Arracourt, even nature itself seemed to shift sides, and once the fog cleared, so too did Germany's hopes of victory. In tank warfare, victory isn't just about armor thickness or gun caliber, it's about communication. At Arracourt, this difference was decisive. Every Sherman rolled into battle equipped with 2 radios, one to link with other tanks, and another to connect with infantry, artillery, and even aircraft. This gave American crews a constant stream of information. If German armor was spotted, coordinates could be relayed instantly. If a unit needed artillery or air support, the call went out in seconds. Shermans weren't just individual tanks, they were part of a network, a moving battlefield web that allowed flexible, coordinated strikes. The Panthers, for all their engineering power, lacked this critical advantage. Many had only a single radio, often reserved for communication with unit leaders rather than between every vehicle. That meant once a command tank was destroyed, and American gunners made sure to target those first. The rest of the German tanks were effectively fighting blind. Crews struggled to coordinate maneuvers, ambushes broke down, and counterattacks collapsed into chaos. This gap was more than technical. It reflected doctrine. The U.S. emphasized teamwork, adaptability, and shared information, while German armor often relied on rigid orders and centralized command. At Arracourt, when leaders fell and radios went silent, German Panthers became isolated giants, easy prey for the smaller but better connected Shermans. In modern terms, the Shermans fought like a networked force, while the Panthers fought like scattered individuals. And in war, connectivity can be deadlier than firepower. Behind the battlefield victories at Arracourt stood an even greater force, American industry. While German engineers prided themselves on building advanced, powerful tanks like the Panther, they could never escape the limits of their production lines. By late 1944, Germany was struggling to produce even 400 Panthers a month. Shortages of steel, fuel, and labor crippled their output, and every loss at the front was painfully hard to replace. The United States, by contrast, turned war production into an unstoppable machine. Its factories rolled out 2,000 Shermans every single month, alongside endless trucks, artillery, aircraft, and spare parts. For every Panther that rolled off a German assembly line, 5 Shermans were already waiting to meet it. This wasn't just about numbers, it was about sustainability. A Sherman lost in battle could be quickly replaced. A Panther lost was nearly irreplaceable. And while German tank crews faced dwindling replacements and unreliable supply chains, American forces knew reinforcements, fuel, and ammunition would keep flowing. That confidence gave U.S. commanders freedom to take risks and adapt, knowing the war machine at home had their backs. At Arracourt, this imbalance was clear. Even as Panthers burned and German units faltered, the Americans could refit, rearm, and return to the fight with fresh machines and rested crews. The Germans simply couldn't keep up. In the end, the Panther may have been the better tank on paper, but wars aren't won on paper. They're one with logistics, production, and the ability to keep fighting tomorrow. At Arracourt, U.S. industry proved as deadly as any Sherman's gun. Human cost, life inside a tank was anything but glamorous. At Arracourt, as Shermans and Panthers clashed, the battlefield turned into a furnace of steel and fire. When a tank was hit, the result was almost always catastrophic: fuel igniting, ammunition cooking off, crews trapped inside burning hulls. Survivors often escaped only with horrific burns or shattered limbs, if they escaped at all. For many, the price of a single engagement was a lifetime scar, an amputation, or worse. Yet despite the sheer brutality, both American and German tankers climbed back into their machines day after day. Courage was not one-sided. U.S. crews fought knowing their Shermans were lighter, their armor thinner, their odds uncertain. German tankers pressed forward in Panthers, aware that every breakdown, every airstrike, every artillery barrage brought them closer to disaster. Still, they fought on, often to the last shell. The chaos of Arracourt revealed the human cost behind the clash of machines. To historians, it may be remembered as a contest of tactics, logistics, and industrial might. But to the men inside those steel coffins, it was a daily struggle with fear, pain, and death. And yet, they kept fighting, driven by duty, by loyalty to their comrades, and by sheer willpower. In the end, the Battle of Arracourt wasn't just a story of Shermans versus Panthers. It was a story of human endurance and bravery in the face of some of the most brutal conditions war could create. By September 1944, Germany's situation in the West was already desperate. The Allies had broken out of Normandy, Paris had been liberated, and American, British, and Canadian forces were pushing toward the German border. Yet the Wehrmacht still hoped for one thing: a decisive counterblow that might halt the Allied advance, buy time, and restore the initiative. Lorraine, with its open fields and vital supply routes, seemed the perfect place to strike. That chance ended at Arracourt. The Panthers, meant to spearhead Germany's counterattack, were torn apart by Sherman's artillery and air power. The fog that promised surprise gave way to clear skies and American dominance. Wave after wave of German armor was reduced to burning wrecks, and with them burned any realistic hope of turning the tide in France. The scale of the defeat was staggering. Dozens of Germany's best tanks were lost in days, many with their crews. Entire battalions were gutted before they even reached the front. Meanwhile, American losses were light, quickly replaced by the endless flow of Shermans rolling out of U.S. factories. For the Wehrmacht, Arracourt wasn't just a battlefield setback. It was the collapse of their last serious attempt to seize the initiative in the West. From that point forward, Germany would never again dictate the tempo of the war. The Americans had shown that speed, coordination, intelligence, and overwhelming logistics could beat heavier German armor. The road to the German border, and eventually the Rhine, now lay open. Arracourt was more than a clash of tanks. It was the moment when Germany's hopes in the West were extinguished, and the momentum of the war shifted permanently into Allied hands. The Battle of Arracourt shattered one of World War II's greatest myths: that victory belonged to the side with the biggest gun and the thickest armor. On paper, the German Panther should have crushed the American Sherman. It was faster, deadlier, and tougher. But war isn't fought on paper. It's fought by people, systems, and nations that can adapt. At Arracourt, the Americans proved that a complete system of war beats any single weapon. Shermans had radios linking them to infantry, artillery, and air support. U.S. crews were well-trained, flexible, and confident that if they were wounded, medics could save them. Artillery could deliver perfectly timed barrages, and when the skies cleared, P-47 Thunderbolts turned the battlefield into a slaughterhouse for German armor. Add to that America's unmatched industry, capable of building 5 Shermans for every Panther, and the outcome was inevitable. The Germans fought with skill and courage, but they fought alone, in machines that broke down, with supply lines that ran dry, and with radios that fell silent once leaders were gone. The Panthers were powerful, but they belonged to a system already collapsing under its own weight. Arracourt wasn't just an American victory, it was a lesson. Wars aren't won by individual weapons, no matter how advanced. They are won by the integration of training, logistics, technology, and teamwork into one unstoppable force. And at Arracourt, that force carried the day, turning 5 outnumbered Shermans into the slayers of dozens of Panthers, and sealing Germany's fate in the West. The Germans thought their Panthers guaranteed victory. Instead, they discovered that American warfare wasn't about the tank, it was about the system. At Arracourt, Systematic superiority crushed technical superiority, and within 8 months, Nazi Germany itself would fall. The Panthers were powerful, but the Shermans had an army, an industry, and a strategy behind them, and that made all the difference. If you found this story shocking, imagine what else history is hiding. Make sure to subscribe to W2 Untold, hit the bell icon, and join us for more thrilling true stories of World War II and beyond. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Video description: in September 1944, the German army launched a desperate counterattack in Lorraine, hoping to crush U.S. forces with their fearsome Panther tanks. But at Arracourt, history was rewritten. 5 outnumbered Shermans, backed by artillery, air power, and flawless teamwork, defeated dozens of Panthers in one of World War II's most shocking tank battles. This documentary-style video explores how training, logistics, intelligence, and sheer adaptability turned the weaker Sherman into the deadliest tank killer of all. From time-on-target artillery barrages to P-47 Thunderbolts, raining destruction from the skies. Discover why Arracourt became the graveyard of Germany's last hope in the West. If you love military history, epic tank battles, and untold World War II stories, this video is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more history brought to life.